media pundits continue to wring their hands over a potential second Trump presidency. One MSNBC commentator went so far as to accuse both Trump, second runner Ron DeSantis, of being fascists, of course. Let's watch.
You've got the front runner of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, the number 2 candidate by polls, Ron DeSantis or DeSantis or whatever it is. They're both fascists. They both want authoritarianism in America.
Later on the network, a Washington Post columnist echoed that same sentiment.
That gathered around Donald Trump and that will enable this move toward fascism. I mean, this is textbook fascism. And it's outrageous. It's incredibly dangerous, not just to our system of democracy and our democratic values. It's just dangerous because he's talking about wanting to essentially fire the people in the federal bureaucracy who know how to run things, who make the country work, who keep our air clean and our water safe, and who keep us safe in the intelligence agencies and in the Defense Department and everywhere. He sees somebody who doesn't toe the line, who doesn't go along with every crazy anti-democratic idea he has. He wants the ability to fire that person and replace him or her with a lackey.
Firing people in the federal bureaucracy. Fascism. That is now fascism.
Look, I don't know how many ways to say this. If Democrats want to be able to credibly push back on what I do think is Donald Trump making arguments that are self-serving, right? Like, they have to offer an alternative critique of federal bureaucracy, of organizations like the FBI and the CIA who have done so much damage to left-leaning movements historically over time. That is a separate critique from what the Republicans are offering. But simply saying Donald Trump is self-interested is not going to be especially persuasive to folks who, regardless, see those organizations as being fundamentally flawed. And Democrats doing this, I love the police state more than anybody else routine, where they flipped from Black Lives Matter to the FBI as our best friend just because Donald Trump is, in fact, wanting to insulate himself against some of these federal charges, whether or not you think they're legitimate charges or not, or some of them are legitimate and some of them are not. You know, it is not coming off as authentic or credible. If they were smart, progressives would say, we do have these concerns with the lack of accountability in these intelligence organizations. We understand why some conservatives might have skepticism that some of these Trump prosecutions are legitimate. So we're going to also similarly push for transparency, maybe even cuts to the program where they become unwieldy and kind of intrinsically unaccountable. And we're going to make sure that we have bipartisan buy-in on whatever investigations are going forward with Donald Trump. But this,
I guess you're a fascist too now.
Yes, wanting to disempower the government makes you a fascist.
Right, that's what is so backward. I mean, Gene Robinson is the hackiest of hacks, is about the nicest thing I can say of him. Fellow graduate of the University of Michigan. So it's totally backwards. Like, the idea of democracy is you vote people into office and they're accountable, they're politically accountable to the process. We've enshrined a massive federal bureaucracy that is only in the most indirect possible ways accountable to the democratic process that exists. There's so many employees that exist that business continues regardless of what's going on in the political process. Look, you can defend that. You can say the political process is too dysfunctional and it's inconvenient to have turnover and direction changing, but that's not consistent with democracy. Democracy is the people choosing who gets to be in charge, and we've moved away from that. In fact, a permanent government federal class that continues business as usual, that has its own policies and cannot be overruled by the people, that is on the scale sliding toward fascism more so than having them wholesale replaced. Now, I take your point that Donald Trump, he wants to put in people that serve him, I guess, sometimes, although last time he was in charge, he also put in tons of people that didn't like him and served to undermine his agenda and would not implement on foreign policy. On him. And that's and that is why I don't think he is the best choice to implement even what conservatives think the right vision of government should be. But that's very different from the charge that's being made there. I mean, do those talking head people not understand at all why the American people in both parties and of all political stripes have lost faith in the permanent class of national security advisors, the permanent class of health advisors, the people who finally just got their funding to Wuhan shut down, years later. Do they not get it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would just push back a little bit and say, I would hope that Donald Trump appoints people not that serve his interests, but which serve the people's interests. And I don't mean to be schmaltzy in saying that, but part of why Donald Trump has come under some scrutiny is because he does seem to be making decisions that are about benefiting him personally, insulating him personally against his own mistakes. No one forced him to take confidential documents and hide them in a bathroom and do all of that. That was silly. It didn't seem to benefit him. Now he's on the hook, and you can say that it's a political prosecution, but it would also have just been very easy not to break the law or to comply with the document requests when he was out of office and they were asking for the stuff back for a year. So if you have made so many unforced errors and now you are trying to attack the to attack prosecutors, to attack the Justice Department, to insulate yourself from your own mistakes, I think that has a very different feel than people who make appointments to advance a political agenda that people voted for. I don't think Republicans in 2016 or people who supported him in 2020 were voting for Donald Trump's right to take documents that were confidential and hide them in his bathroom and show them to reporters to make himself feel like a big man or whatever the case was. That would be my only caveat.
And you know, and I don't agree with everything the DeSantis administration has done, certainly. I don't really agree with this fight with Disney. But on the firing government employees front, DeSantis' first act in office, he's not president, when he became governor of Florida, was to fire the Parkland sheriff, the sheriff who had poorly trained the police officers who responded to that situation, who said he was beyond all accountability and who had no right to question him, whose office had ignored or improperly handled multiple tips about Nicholas Cruz. He was fired. He should have been fired. I bet you couldn't find a person alive who thinks it was wrong to fire him. Sometimes government employees should be fired, just like private sector employees, just like anyone else, for doing a bad job. And you're gonna don't pretend to me this is fascism. The government figures need to be accountable to the people. They need to be accountable to the people.
Yes. I mean, it's also the case that one of the stories from yesterday out of Florida, when we're talking about turnover, is the non-government employees who are professors, staff at New College, which Ron DeSantis independently decided to take over and create in his ideological image. He's said that explicitly. He fired the dean and replaced them with a buddy of his at a very high salary. Things that, to me, speak of corruption and an interest in an ideological fight as opposed to the education of the people of Florida. But regardless, as a consequence of him having done that, the story out yesterday was that New College is experiencing a brain drain and faculty are fleeing. Now, that's voluntary. He didn't,
right.
He forced the president out, but he didn't force the rest of the staff out. But there is, I think, 1/3 of the faculty now has decided to leave, an unprecedented amount of faculty turnover. So again, people are going to start asking questions about whether these kinds of actions are being done in service of the diverse interests of people in the state. There's ideological diversity in a state, different kinds of people. One of the things we used to value about America is that it's a pluralistic country where different people can live side by side and respect each other's differences in a kind of socially libertarian way. And are people, are there legitimate concerns about Ron DeSantis taking a heavier hand with how people live their lives? Are there legitimate concerns about Donald Trump disobeying some settled norms about how government should work and not completely cleaning out every administration, allowing people to gain expertise and consistency from over 4-year cycles to work on projects that take longer than 4 years without feeling like everyone has to be out on an ideological basis when so much of the running of government isn't ideological at all. I mean, I think those are legitimate questions, but just wrapping your arms around intelligence agencies, which have a very bad reputation and used to have an extremely bad reputation among liberals, just seems to me like a political non-starter. And it's not clear to me what Democrats think that they're doing there.
And there's tremendous continuity, again, in government services, even given political turnover. I mean, this is just what elections have consequences. I liked a lot of what the education secretary under Donald Trump, Betsy DeVos, did with respect to Title IX and changing some of the adjudication on college campuses. Then Joe Biden won, and his education secretary reversed all of that, and I oppose it, and I think it's very bad, but they have the right to do it. Joe Biden won the election, and you run on a vision and an agenda for the country, and if you win, you get to implement it. And that's just reality. And it seems like it's a lot of complaining or fear that that's going to happen again, even though that's natural and that's what happened.
Well, does that mean then, Robby, that people who are upset because they think that the Biden Justice Department is being weaponized against Donald Trump should also relax because Joe Biden won and he gets to have his Justice Department and they get to pursue the priorities that Biden wants to put into effect, and those might include, I mean, some of these are state prosecutions, but that might include federal prosecution of Donald Trump. Well,
if the federal prosecution of Donald Trump rests on solid evidence that he actually broke the law, that should happen. Political figures who break the law of either party should be held accountable. I'm for government accountability. I don't want people getting away scot-free. I don't totally buy this banana republic logic that we would be wrong to jail a former president. Well, if they're criminals, we would do that. And in Europe, there's former presidents sitting and prime ministers in jail. It happens. It would be banana republic to ignore gross, horrific wrongdoing. The question is, are these serious crimes? And I think some of the things that Trump is alleged to have done are quite serious. Others were, again, I talk about how you can obstruction of justice everyone to death, and it's always fair to call out biased and unfair prosecution, including was like Hillary Clinton matters handled differently, were Hunter Biden matters handled differently, and then also it should be some of the weaponization of the federal government is directed against the American people, not the leaders of the other political party. There's too much. If I were to critique the Republican Party, it would be there's way too much anger over how Donald Trump is treated by the federal weaponization of the federal bureaucracy, and not enough about how American citizens are treated. Yeah. Let's look out for people's rights. People have rights. That's what we should care about the most. Yeah, including all of the protesters in Atlanta who are being held on domestic terrorism charges for protesting Cop City and passing out flyers and exercising their First Amendment rights. Domestic terrorism charges. It's not just for January 6th. Oh, boy. More Rising right after this.